Your GCSE exam tomorrow and you want to be a winner like the EAGS? Let me help you get high marks for Section B and give you a fresh perspective. Stay tuned. Love the EAGS. Schofield on Shakespeare.
Simili a degli eroi, abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove vuoi.
How do you get full marks in this section, god damn it? Let's ponder this while looking at this exam style question. What is the examiner looking for here? Plenty of gushing similes and metaphors about nature, which perhaps runs out of steam halfway through? Or might more creative, alternative approaches get higher marks? What would you write about? How would you make it genuinely interesting? How would you make it stand out amongst descriptions of turquoise skies or seas and rustling leaves? Have a think. Press pause now. Some of you may have already pre-learned something to adapt for this question. Either way, I do think there is something to be said for churning out a quick plan during the exam, which can be helpful in ensuring a piece of writing doesn't limply run out of steam. Plans can also help you structure your piece for effect. Think about switches in focus to keep your reader engaged. Think about withholding information. For instance, in my piece, I'm taking the considerable risk of writing about a football match. In general, my advice is to avoid writing about football like the plague. In the majority of cases, it ends up being cliched and dull. So how do I plan to avoid this? Well, I plan to have a more sophisticated tone by musing more broadly about beauty in the second paragraph. I also plan to spend far more time describing the setting as opposed to the minutiae of the match. For instance, I have a whole paragraph planned on describing football shirts. I also plan to switch focus by having a paragraph predominantly on sounds. As ever with these pieces, you want to engage all of the reader's senses, not just sight. You will note that I have a pre-planned circular structure, but with altered tenses to indicate the passing of time. So can pieces about football ever work? Time to make your mind up. Here's my response. Wembley will shake and it will be beautiful. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, at least according to a well-known wretched cliche. There are conventional ideas of beauty, with typical examples referencing Renaissance art, the naked female form, a Guernsey cow in a sun-drenched meadow, or an idyllic white sand Caribbean beach. One of Shakespeare's lesser-known plays includes the line, "Beauty lives with kindness." That moron Donald Trump famously referred to tariffs being the most beautiful word in the dictionary. But let me take you in another direction. I'm looking back to a particular time and a particular place. The date is Saturday the 17th of May and the time is 2:28 p.m. In front of me there's a giant wall of grey concrete partially masking an escalator. As we begin to ascend, there are inspirational messages capturing past moments on the right-hand side. Pressure is working down the pit. Pressure is having no work at all. And the crazy gang have beaten the culture club. I half read these and mutter to myself about cynical marketing and tired tosh. But in amongst the concrete and advertising, the hints of exploitation and unconvincing attempts to recreate past excitement, we wear red and blue. After a great deal of thought, I've plunged for my 29-year-old 18th birthday present TDK Classic with 10 and Schofield proudly, embarrassingly, printed on the back. My son is wearing a far more recent number with slightly thinner, tilted red and blue stripes, and the mysterious sponsor W88. All around are familiar friends. The 1990 iconic Fly Virgin, evoking images of a youthful, exuberant Ian Wright. The 2005 Churchill Insurance, bringing back memories of both Dougie Freedman and the birth of my first child. The 2023 Cinch, which was half and half rather than striped. It is a beautiful sight. Sound can be transformational. Sound can elevate the soul above the tawdry, above the functional, above cheap shabbiness. Squeezed together into a bubbling volcano of red and blue, sounds begin to rise and form. My mind is singing now as I recall, although my lips are pursed, and this room is silent. Beautifully silent. I can't resist. Let's now move time on to 4:46 p.m. A wholly unexpected shift in patterns and freedom, style, exuberance and growing excitement. I grab my son and suddenly we are jumping. Crazily, manically. My heart, brace yourself for a cliche but one which cannot be avoided, feels like it is going to explode. Quite extraordinarily, quite inexplicably, but quite magically, we have scored. Above the stadium lies a dazzling sea of blue. There are ripples of wispy white swaying with the early summer breeze. Above the stadium may lie a higher power, with aims and intentions largely unknown to ignorant human souls. An hour later and disbelief reigns. Disbelief mixed with the most wonderful, the most beautiful joy. TV cameras zoom in and show bald, middle-aged men blubbing, resplendent in red and blue of course, or picturesque young women beaming. Remember, the game is for all. But this isn't what I recall. I marvel at the scale of the scene and the communality. As one, 40,000 red and blue souls beat, sing, roar, live, love, shout, be, cry, and remember. Wembley shook. It was beautiful. Let's now mull over this model response and continue to give you ideas for your exam in the process. Well, we want the opening sentence to be striking and to interest. This is the aim here as I reference the banner unfurled in the Crystal Palace end of Wembley prior to the FA Cup final. Try to create a more sophisticated tone. I aim to do this here by giving 3 quotations about beauty, which are very different. However, I also create a lively cynical tone through my vocabulary. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder is a well-known wretched cliché, whilst Trump is referred to as that moron. These adjectives and the noun make my piece livelier and more engaging. You all know that in speeches you need to directly involve your audience. But readers also deserve some attention. Notice my abrupt shift within my third very short paragraph. But let me take you in another direction. I want to speak directly to my reader. I want to take them along with me on my journey and reassure them implicitly that this journey is worth taking. Look at the use of the present tense in this paragraph, even though the events described took place in the past. This creates a sense of important immediacy. It was such a vivid experience that I am reliving it right now. Note that I'm persevering with my slightly cynical tone. This comes across in the use of inverted commas around inspiration and the phrase cynical marketing and tired tosh. Alliteration can work in these kinds of pieces, particularly if it isn't weakly obvious. Mutter to myself about cynical marketing and tired tosh. Notice the level of detail in this paragraph. I'm terrified about boring the reader with tired cliches about football, and so I go into extraordinary depth to describe 2 football shirts. Notice the bracketed embarrassingly, which creates a more sophisticated, self-deprecating feel. Also, look at the broader range of punctuation, with the colon used accurately to introduce more complex items within a list, which are separated by semicolons. Notice also how I weave in references to past football players with momentous events in my life, including the birth of my first child. This helps broaden the scope and highlights the seminal role football can play in some people's lives. In the paragraph beginning with sounds, in my mind I'm recalling some of the raucous singing within the stadium. Glad all over, my father said to me, Eze's on fire, etc. However, I've got to be mindful of the reader and the examiner. Non-football fans will be spectacularly disinterested in verbatim accounts of chants. Examiners are unlikely to reward these with high marks. So I take a different approach. I talk about the potential spiritual impact of collective sounds, without stating explicitly that I'm referring to football songs. Notice also my use of imagery, which also creates a more sophisticated feel. There is a bubbling volcano of red and blue. This highlights the simmering excitement of the Palace fans, who feel as though they could erupt at any moment. Plenty of deliberate writing and structuring for effect within this section. Notice the repetition of silence and the very short sentence for effect at the end of the first paragraph on screen. Beautifully silent. Notice also further dramatically short sentences for effect. I shift the adverbs from their natural position in the previous sentence to two separate sentences. Crazily, manically. I also self-consciously comment on my simile and get out of the fact that it is a cliche by openly admitting it. Note also the tricolon in the final sentence. Quite extraordinarily, quite inexplicably, quite magically. I'm also more explicit in this sentence than I have been elsewhere by stating that Palace have scored. You can't use allusions all the time. Sometimes you need to state exactly what something is, exactly what has happened. For any question which asks you to describe, you're going to want some description of the setting. This is what I do in this paragraph. I make it more interesting by referencing not just the sky, but a higher power above this. Implicit in this may be that God wanted Crystal Palace to win. In my penultimate paragraph, a number of things to pick out. Firstly, the personification of disbelief and its positioning as the subject within that clause. Not, we couldn't believe it, but an hour later and disbelief reigns. I also create a more complex narrative by contrasting the TV pictures with my own sense, but this isn't what I recall. Note how I joyously pile on verbs in the final sentence of the penultimate paragraph. 40,000 red and blue souls beat, sing, roar, live, love, shout, be, cry and remember. This creates a manic energy and captures the enormous range of feelings being experienced simultaneously by the Palace fans in the stadium. Finally, note the sense of finality in this final paragraph, with a reference back to the opening paragraph, but the change in tense. Wembley shook. It was beautiful. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, not just celebrating Crystal Palace's first ever trophy, but more importantly, giving you some things to think about and some advice prior to your crucial GCSE English Language exam. Good luck. Many thanks for watching.